So, welcome and thanks for joining me this afternoon. This is the Curmudgeon's Guide to Building Drupal Websites. I'm going to be your curmudgeon today, so you should know a little bit about me. I'm the director of digital experience platforms at a company called Bounteous. It's out of Chicago, but we have an office here in San Francisco. I've been working with Drupal and at Bounteous since about 2009. I've been developing professionally since 1994. I've been a curmudgeon forever. And fun fact about me is I am currently half done with a 9,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. It's waiting for me back at home.
What's the puzzle about?
Battle of Algiers. It's a Ravensburger puzzle. They're kind enough to send you it in 2 bags, half and half. So that's why I know I'm exactly halfway through. So a little bit about Bounteous. We were formed in 2003. We work with a lot of great companies, really focusing on the big picture digital solutions for them. We do everything from experience design to analytics and insight, to strategy, to engineering, all the good stuff. If you'd like to talk to me a little bit about it later, I can talk to you about it for 45 minutes, but I'll switch to my talk to get through it. So the agenda today, just a little bit of an overview of some of my thoughts. Then we'll talk about things in 3 different buckets: effective Drupaling, efficient projects, and growing yourself as a developer. So, I think the first thing to understand about me is that whenever we do a project, a Drupal project, my goal is to make sure the client is happy in the end. Lots of folks will say on time, on budget, and that's great. Sometimes the client is happy with that, but you can make them sad being on time, on budget. You can also make them ecstatic, even if you have to extend those 2 things. So that's my goal, happy client. And I think to do this, we need efficient teams, we need an effective plan, and we need to clearly communicate throughout the process. So let's talk about Drupal. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. It's been attributed to Benjamin Franklin, so I'll give him credit for it. And I really think it's true. Before we start building, we really need to have a solid plan in place. Without that plan, the build is going to be not good. So I think there's a few things that are important to building that plan. And the first thing is to be involved early in the project. When you start building these sites, or these sites are designed, sometimes your designers don't understand how to build for a content management system. Today, we talk a lot about component-based designs. And it's really important that they understand that. You're the expert in the room. You're the person that knows what Drupal is capable of doing. Now, that said, I can make it do anything I want. At the end of the day, it's HTML, it's JavaScript, and it's CSS, right? But we want to work within the confines of it, what needs to do its job well. But we don't want to force that on the designers. So we want to make sure that when they're designing the site, that they're keeping that in mind, but if they do something that's kind of outside of the bounds of Drupal, or makes it work a little harder, that they're doing that in a mindful way. I also want to think about, what are the things that can go wrong with this whole project. Some people call this like a pre-mortem. So I want to think about it. 6 months down the road, when this project is off the rails, what happened? What made it go off the rails? And I want to do that because I want to understand, what things could go wrong, and then what are my options when I get there. So if you think about what your options are, I often think about them in the triangle, the scope, budgeting, and timeline triangle. You can have 2 of those be flexible. One of them absolutely has to be fixed. So you want to understand up front which of those things has to be fixed. A lot of times the client says the budget has to be fixed, right? So if the budget can't move, then I need to be able to reduce scope or stretch the timeline out a little bit. But you might have clients like a Domino's Pizza where they view it a little bit differently. They have to have their commercials in the can and ready to go months in advance, which means the timeline can't move. But it means that the scope has to be adjustable, and more likely the budget has to be adjustable. I might have to throw more people at the project. I also want to know what the feature prioritization looks like. what are the things that this site has to do, and what are the things that are nice to have. So what are the things I can push off to maybe a phase 2 or phase 3. Another important part of this front is understanding a little bit about the tech stack and the architecture. So one of the things I want to know up front is who's hosting this site. Like, am I working with an Oracle or Pantheon that really knows what they're doing, and I get the sites, I get all the environments that I need, I don't have to do any work, or is this going to be a homegrown system? If it's going to be a homegrown system, what do they know about hosting a Drupal site? Right? Do they understand Varnish? Do they understand MySQL? How are they going to scale the site? As it grows, those types of things. I also want to know, do I need a local development setup? Now, funny is, we have developers that shift from project to project, so it's really important that I have local development environments, and so it's just part of the stack. But if you're working with a 1 or 2 person team, maybe it's not really important to build out, a fancy local development setup. I also need to understand how the data is going to flow through the system. This is one of the places where projects go off the rails fairly frequently. So, what are the key points of integration? What are the systems that are going to talk to Drupal? What are the systems that Drupal has to talk to? And how is it going to talk to those systems? Is it going to be, am I just integrating with the Drupal Analytics so that I just use a module and do some configuration? Or is there some kind of custom system, a custom CRM system that I have to work with? And what's the interface going to be with that? I also want to know about migrating content into the system. If you're building a system from scratch, that's great. But if you're a re-platforming system, I need to know how I'm going to get that content into the new system. If I have 10,000 blog posts that all have the same format, that's pretty easy to migrate into Drupal. But what about product catalog that's got like 2 or 3 products, or maybe a handful? That's something that might be a candidate for manual migrating. But regardless, I need to know what I'm going to migrate in and how I'm going to migrate in. Last thing, about preparing for the build is I want to document everything. So this is really important to me because I need, for a few reasons. One of the reasons is the way I work, the way I think. Writing it down helps me. Make sure that I have identified everything that I think needs to go into the architecture, and identified everything I think needs to be into this, the project plan. But it's also great because I can hand it off to developers or stakeholders, and they can understand what we're thinking. What's the vision behind this project? How are we going to build this project? A good example of something that's in the document is the development workflow. So if I have a requirement that's in a Jira card, how does it go from that to in production? How do we do peer reviews? How are we going to do QA? How is it going to be pushed from one environment to the next? All those types of things. I also start to talk about some of the things that are important to the project. Generally, the theme is important to me. I want the themers to understand how I think we should be building the theme out. And because I'm more of a back-end guy, it's usually in consultation with somebody that really knows what they're doing there. But you really want to make sure that anyone coming to the project understands how we're going to be theming the project. And I also want to list some of the modules that the build depends on. I'm not suggesting you list them all out because it would be kind of tedious, but I do want some of the key modules that are going to be there. So we do a lot of component-based builds at Bounteous, and there are a number of different ways you can do that. So how am I going to do that if we're going to do component-based build? Are we going to be using paragraphs and letting the content editors work within a content type and just move things up and down that way, or are we going to be using layout builder, or using themes, or one of many other ways to do it? Key points to the architecture are also important to talk about. So migrations and integrations, if you haven't figured it out, have come back to bite me in the butt a few times. So it's really important I lay those things out. But it's any other kind of key point to the architecture. So I've worked on a project where we did some tight integration with Magento, and the way we were getting the detail page information for Magento was by using edge side includes. So Varnish was talking to the Magento server to put information into us. It was a new concept to the team, so I wanted to make sure I laid it out in some good detail so everybody understood exactly what we were going to do. So you've thought a lot about the build, and you've prepared the build, and so now we're getting ready to do the build. I love this quote because it's spot on. Prolific developers don't always write a lot of code. Instead, they solve a lot of problems. The two things are not the same. So how do you enable the developers to solve a lot of problems without you being in the way? And the way you do this is by giving them guiding principles. When projects, especially big projects, get going, I don't have time, nor do you want me to be solving every little problem. But I want my team to be able to do this, and I want them to think how I would think, and make sure that we're solving those problems correctly. So you can list a bunch of these principles. I'm sure everyone has their own, but here are a few that I continue to go back to time and again. One is we use Drupal core as much as we can, then we'll use contrib modules, and then finally we'll write custom code. Custom code should be a last option, and for a variety of reasons. One, it's way more efficient to be using something that's already built, right? And this again goes back to talking through design with the XD team. Sometimes they envision things to work one way, and the module works kind of a different way. And if we can get them to work, use the module as it is, it's much more efficient for us. Two, if we write our own code, and I find and fix a bug, that just helps my project. But if I'm using something like paragraphs, and I find and fix a bug, it helps the whole community. So this is a great way to set yourself up to be able to give back to the community. When you're building out this application, we want to touch each area of the application as few times as possible. Every time you touch a piece of code or an area of the application, you take on some overhead. There's peer reviews of code, there's QA testing, there's user acceptance testing, those types of things. So every time I touch something, all that stuff has to happen, right? And so the more times I do it, the less efficient I become. Don't hack core or contrib. When I first started in Drupal, that was like period. But now, I usually follow it up with, but if you're going to do it right. So we use Composer Patch and Patches directory to do this. We can use Git to generate patch files for us, and so that we have an automatic way to apply those patches to our source code. So that would be the right way to do it. But if you can avoid it, try to do that. And then personal pet peeve is this. The code that you're in the code, it's not part of the requirements, but I know we need this. Just don't write it. I think the acronym is GAGNEED. You ain't gonna need it. So just leave it alone. If you do need it in 6 months, just go ahead and add it at that time. Another part to making your builds really efficient is by using all these community modules, as I said before. But what I like to do is I like to use the same modules over and over and over. Now, it's not to say that every problem is in the nail, so I hit it with a hammer. But I do find myself going back to the same modules over and over again because they solve, the problems that I find, or they give me features that I need on, more and more sites. There's a couple of reasons I like to do this. One is that as you manage a larger and larger code base with more and more clients, when you get the inevitable email on a Wednesday afternoon that says there's a security problem with this particular module, it's a lot easier for me to say that affects me or it doesn't affect me. If it hits one of these modules, I know for sure I have a whole bunch of patching to do. If it's I won't pick on any particular module, a weird module, I can safely assume that I'm not using it. The other thing that you get from it is you get to know which modules play nice with other modules. If anyone has done a lot of D7 development, has worked with domain access, you probably know what I'm talking about. There's just lots of gotchas with domain access. So you really want to make sure that your modules are going to play nice with them. If you don't have your own toolbox, or you don't do a lot of sites, there are Drupal distributions that you can use. I think a lot about Acquia's Lightning distribution. And what that is it's Drupal, but it's an opinionated version of Drupal. It's their thoughts about what's important and how best to build your Drupal sites. So if you don't want to form your own opinion, it's a great place to go. So you have your toolbox, and you run into a feature you need, and your tools in your toolbox don't cover it, right? So what do? Well, first thing you do, you can search on D.O, you can search on Google. My personal favorite is Phone a Friend. Just try to find somebody that I know that may have run into that problem before. Hey, this is what I got to do. Have you ever run into it? Yeah, I did. I use this module. That's great. Either way you find your module, you find the module. And then usually I'll take some time just to make sure, either from reading the project page or from loading it onto a local sandbox, that it actually is going to do what I think it needs to do, and that makes me happy. But even if it does exactly what I need it to do, I still have a little more work to do. I still want to think through whether or not I actually want to use this module. I ask myself some questions. Is it covered by the security team? Who are the maintainers? When's the last commit? What does the issue queue look like? How many sites are using this particular module? Now, there's no right or wrong answers here, because it all depends on the context. So, if you're building a website for a major financial institution, and it's a public-facing site, you can be damn sure that I'm going to make sure it's covered by the security team, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. But what happens if you're building an intranet site that's not going to see the light of day? You probably don't care. How many sites are using it? If it's a very particular use case that you need it for. I remember someone talking about a module for a library system. The number of users or the number of sites using it can be really small, but they could be very, very large. If there's a lot of people using it, I'll trust it a little bit more. But ultimately, all these questions just help you make the decision. They don't actually tell you what the decision is. We do more than write code in Drupal and use modules and big things. And so there's a few more tools I'd suggest you have in your tool chest. One is Composer. Everyone, D8 uses Composer, right? Most of us use it. If not, it's a dependency management tool, and it's great. It does a lot of good. It pulls in the right dependencies as you need them for whichever module you're using. And you can do lots of things. Again, like I mentioned, Composer Patch helps you patch the code base with particular patches that I have. Drush is another great tool. If you aren't using it, Drush is a command line utility that lets me talk to Drupal sites. And again, it has lots and lots and lots of features. The feature that I use time and again is Drush UOI, which gives me a one-time login link. So I don't have to remember any passwords. I just Drush UOI with the alias, and it opens the browser, puts me in as admin or whichever user I select that I want to be. Git, we're all using source code control systems, hopefully. If not, use one. But we use Git, and it might you might choose a different one because there are lots of good ones out there. But really know what you're getting in that tool. For example, for Git, there is one command that I use time and again, which is git bisect. And what git bisect does is it lets you find out who committed the thing that broke your site. You tell the kid, this is a commit that worked, and this is one that didn't, and it does a binary search for you, checking out commits, and you say, yep, this works, or no, it doesn't. And at the end, you know exactly which piece of, what commit broke your code. Drupal console, I've used a little bit. It's got lots of interesting tools, and it's available for you to use. Once you masters of the top 3, I think that's a good one to go to. I have not yet mastered Drupal console. So this next slide is what I think about effectively debugging problems. Now, we all write perfect code, so this isn't for us, it's for when we're helping out the guy next to us that wrote some crappy code. But I think, when you're going to effectively debug problems, I think about it in a couple different ways. One of the ways is just knowing what I have available to me. So, with Drupal you have lots of things you can use, right? We can write to the log, we can use devel, we've got Drupal console, again, that has some of that nice stuff. Twig debugger, you can turn that on to find out how you're building your HTML. The one on here that's kind of interesting is Drush SCR. And if you've not used Drush SCR, it allows you to run a PHP script that is fully bootstrapped with Drupal. So basically, if you can get that in Drupal, you can get that in this PHP script. And so where I use that is if I'm in production, I can't change code, and I don't want to change code in production, but I can sometimes write scripts that simulate what's going on. It helps give me some information if that's the only place I can see the problem happening. PHP, a couple different ways to dump things to a file or to the screen, but integrating your IDE with Xdebug, if you take one thing from this talk, it's that. Drupal is a complicated piece of software, and with hooks and services, it's a little harder to think through how things are happening in Drupal. So by being able to set breakpoints and step through the code, it makes it much easier to debug. So you have tools that you can use. Now you have to have a strategy. And my strategy is pretty simple, 3 steps. One is assessing the problem, and what do I know about the problem? So, the first thing I want to know is where I can reproduce it. If you get a problem that you can't reproduce, really hard to fix it. Not only is it hard to fix it, it's really hard to know if you've solved the problem, right? So I don't like remedies. But let's assume we can reproduce the problem. Where can we reproduce the problem? Can I only reproduce in production? Can I reproduce in another environment? Hopefully I can reproduce it locally, because if I can do it, I have the best chance of solving that problem. I also want to know what the user said that came up with the problem. Like, do they have 8 steps that tells you how they got that problem? Or did they just bang on the keys and say something happened? But all that stuff's good to know because it starts helping me form a hypothesis. So I want to have an idea of what I think the problem is. And the way I like to think about it is I want to have a strong opinion that's loosely held. So I want to really have a firm idea of what the problem is. But as I start to accumulate data, I need to walk away from that. I can't get married to that idea. And then the last thing is I want to do things to eliminate possibilities. I want to basically start testing my hypothesis and trying to break it or prove it's right. So a good example of this is we had a client recently move from a Drupal VM based local development environment to a Docker-based local development environment. And there was a Magento container and a Drupal container, and locally in the Docker environment, our Drupal sites couldn't talk to the Magento site, which is bad. So I worked with the developer on it, we assessed the problem, and then we formed a hypothesis. Of course it was Magento, couldn't possibly be Drupal. And then we started to do things to eliminate the possibilities. So first thing we did was, again, we just confirmed that we couldn't talk to it with Drupal, and we knew that was the case. Then we tried to call the API using curl on the Magento container. Gosh darn, it worked. That was bad. So then we said, well, let's run that same command from the Drupal container. Didn't that work too? So now we're saying, okay, it's definitely not our original hypothesis. It's definitely not Magento. So it's probably something that we've configured wrong in Drupal. And sure enough, we spent probably another 10, 15 minutes, changed the configuration, and bam, we got a problem. Right? So it's a nice way to kind of walk through those steps. And if you're really good at problem solving, you probably do this without thinking about it. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about efficient projects. So, one of the things that I found over the years is that we need to have more than technical skills to be efficient in these projects. And I've got 5 things that I think are important. I'm sure others can come up with other ideas as well. But strong leadership, clearly defined roles, psychological safety so people can feel free to make mistakes and give ideas, great processes, and communication. Communication is key. I'm going to focus on that aspect of it today. So, in a project, we communicate daily, obviously. And there's a variety of different ways that we do this. We have our daily stand-ups, where we talk about, what we're doing, what we did yesterday, what we're doing today, what our problems are. And this is a great way to understand what the team is working on and understand like how you can help other folks and what's going on in total. We have the ad hoc communications that happen. We have Slack, we have email, we have phone. I think people still use phone. Lots of different ways we communicate, right? And it's just understanding how people work with these different communication devices. If you send me an email, and at the top of the email, you don't tell me a deadline that you need an answer, it's going to take a while for me to get to it. You send me a Slack message, you're probably going to get me to respond a lot quicker. But I want to focus a bit on peer reviews, because this is one of the ways that we as developers communicate quite often. And I think peer reviews are maybe, I think they're misunderstood, or I have a different take maybe than most folks. The first idea I have with peer reviews is that the person that should review your code first is you. Okay? So we use get. So whenever I make, anytime I'm working on a feature, our card in Jira, when I'm done with that card, I use get status to tell me everything that's changed, and I go through the files one by one. I do a get diff on anything that's changed. I VI any files I've added, and I just confirm the files that I want removed. This way, I am absolutely sure that what's going in is what I want. This will help you catch like the variables that are named blah and things like that. And then once I'm ready, I commit it, and it's off. I commit my peer review, and it's off to the races. One of the other things I think is misunderstood about peer reviews is the goal. So my goal with peer review is to disseminate information throughout the team. It is not to find bugs. Now, if I ask you to raise your hand if you found a bug in peer review, I'm sure everyone's going to raise their hand. And I don't deny that will happen. That's not my primary goal. Automated testing, QA testers that are paid handsomely for what they do, those are the folks that are going to be a lot more efficient at finding these bugs than we are just looking at some code. But what we really need is we need to disseminate that information. So if you have somebody that's your migration expert and they're doing all the migration code, what happens when they want to go on vacation, right? Or what happens when the person that's built the communicator between Drupal and Magento goes away, right? Leaves, goes to a different job, gets hit by a bus, right? We always talk about that as a bus factor of 1. We want to eliminate that if we can. And these peer reviews are one good way to do that. When I do peer reviews, I think it's really important to remember it's a conversation. And sometimes I will look at the code that's been sent to me to review, and I will Slack that person and say, can we just talk about this? Like, let's walk through it together. But if I don't do that, I remember that in my comments, it's going to be, it's going to be communication, it's going to be conversation. And part of this is, again, because I view this as disseminating information, I just need to learn sometimes about what's going on. I might not even be thinking that there's a problem there, but I just don't quite understand what's happening. So I'll do that. I also ask a lot of questions. So part of that is not wanting to, directly conflict with somebody, right? That's just part of my personality. But a lot of times, if I'm peer reviewing a code of an entry-level developer, if I ask them a question that said, hey, I noticed you wrote this code here and it looks a lot like this function that's over here. Did you consider using that? If I ask that question, the answer might be, oh, I didn't know that function existed. Great, we'll do that. And the answer might be, oh yeah, I thought about that, but for X, Y, and Z reasons, I didn't do that. If I just tell them to use that function, and they don't have nearly as much experience as I do, they're going to just do that. And I'm going to introduce bugs that I said we can't really find or don't find very often into peer reviews, because they're going to trust that I know what I'm doing, when I just didn't have the right context that they had, and if I'd asked them the question, I did it. So, those are some thoughts on peer reviews. This is like one of my favorite quotes. Always code as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent psychopath who knows where you live. It's helpful because the violent psychopath is probably going to be you, right? 6 months down the road, it's probably me that's going to be fixing that code, fixing that bug, all that good stuff. So be nice to your future self, right? Don't repeat yourself. It's interesting. Has anybody read the Pragmatic Program? Okay, I'm old. 20 years ago, a couple guys wrote the Pragmatic Programmer. It just came out as a 20th anniversary edition, and I'm rereading it now. It's a great book. This is where, if you heard "Don't Repeat Yourself," that's where it comes from. It used to be that it was just about copy and paste, and it's that's not really what they meant apparently, but it's a good thing to think about. Like if I copy and paste code, and I end up with 20 versions of that thing, when I find out there's a problem, the chances of me remembering all 20 places is pretty bad. Hopefully I do a search, but just don't do it. You'll be painful as you do. Things should do one thing. So variables should hold one thing. Classes should describe one object, one type of object. Functions should do one thing. If they don't, you have to waste energy reading the code to understand what's happening. I want to trust that if I'm reading a function and there's a temp variable that holds a date at the top, by the time I get to the bottom, I need to know that it is that same thing. And it doesn't randomly hold a Boolean value. If you make sure that everything does one thing, it makes it a lot easier to structure your code to be self-documented. I don't like comments, and we'll get to that in a second, but I don't. I just don't like them. I think they're often wasteful. But if I write my code to be self-documented, I don't need them as much, right? Like if I have a function and it says give account balance, and that's all it does, I don't need a comment to tell me what I did, right? So just, if you make sure that things do one thing, it's a lot easier to write self-documenting code. And comment where appropriate, much as I don't like them, they're so important. If you have a function and you need to talk about what it really does, do that. But make sure that your comment for the function isn't, basically the code thrown up into the comment, right? That violates the don't repeat yourself principle. So I want to make sure that those comments are meaningful, and I don't want to have to keep, as I change the function, I have to go change that comment as well. If you've made an important, decision within the code, like you need to do this. And I just saw this in a peer review actually, where the developer said, "Hey, I really hate to do this, but there's no other good way to do this, even though this isn't a great way to do it." Right? And so now the next time somebody comes into that code and they see that code, if there's no comment there, they go, "Why did Matthew do that? Like, let me fix that," only to break things. Only use them where you need to. The more you use the comment stuff, part of the code is to read, and so weirdness. And then ask yourself, how easy is this stuff to change, right? When you build a module, what happens when you delete the module, when you disable the module? That functionality goes away. Like, can I just disable it and delete it? Or do I have to do other things, right? If I have to do other things, the module isn't designed well, so think about it. Documentation is pretty important. Most developers don't like it to do it, but it's really important. Commenting and having self-documented code, that's great, but your business analysts and your project managers and others on the team, they don't read your code, right? So we need another place where we talk about things. Sometimes it's Jira cards, sometimes it's Confluence or Wiki or whatever you use to build out your documentation. step-by-step instructions are really good for that type of thing. So, if you're building a local development environment and it isn't like a one-step process, it's a good thing to document. So that the next person that comes along can follow your documentation and get started, pretty easily. And if you're the one that came up with it and you want to hand it off to somebody, a great way to do that is to explain how to get an environment set up, as an example, and then send that person off to actually do it, right? And then they're going to build that. They're going to get their system set up, and two, they're going to have this documentation. The great thing is all the things that you forgot, all the software that you installed already that you forgot about, they're going to find that for you. If you skip steps, they're going to find that for you, all the good stuff. So it's a great way to document it, have someone else learn it, and then validate the documentation. And then if you really get tired of repeating an answer, I know I do, then I just try to document it. Have a place where the team goes for that type of thing, but just make sure you have it written down someplace. Okay. You spend a few minutes on growing yourself as a developer. I was actually in a training class this week, and this quote came up, and I stole it because it's awesome. Uncle Bob writes, or says, "Continuous improvement is an intrinsic part of professionalism." And I think it's, absolutely true. I've been doing this for 25 years. The first code I wrote professionally was C code on an SEO Unix platform. And I'll give bonus points to anybody that knows, where SEO is out of. Right? And I've written Power Builder, I've written Visual Basic, Visual C++, Java, you name it. I've been around and I've done a bunch of things. But, now I'm doing this stuff. So how can I do that? Well, I'm just curious, right? How can you be curious? Well, one way you're doing this today, right? Attend conferences. And then Kevin does a great job of making sure that we talk and then we record it. And so you can go on YouTube and you can watch a bunch of stuff. If there's anything you're thinking about, that you need to learn, any concept that's out there, it's a good chance you can find, a video from a King per pound. Read, it's really important. I subscribe to a number of newsletters. There's a great Drupal newsletter that comes out every Thursday. Has some really nice content in it. I read newsletters on leadership. O'Reilly has some really good stuff. There's a company called ThoughtWorks that has some really good stuff. They have like a technology radar that comes out, which is great. Make sure you're thinking beyond just Drupal, right? Blogs are great. Reese's got a great blog. Books are still important, right? Like I read lots of books. I'll probably read, a handful of tech books every year, but it's really important to read and keep doing that. And ask what your friends are doing. I'm fortunate to work with a lot of great colleagues. And one of my colleagues, Brian, is really into design systems and static site generators. And the things that I have really no knowledge of, and I pick his brain, and I get to learn lots of great stuff about it. It's awesome. And then, if you're on a project, stretch yourself a little bit. Don't always do the same things over and over again. So now, here's the caveat. If it's Thursday and you're launching on Friday, and you've got a bunch of stuff to get done, maybe not, right? But if the project's coming along and you're in the middle of the project, if you're like me, I'm not really a CSS guy, I might try to fix a Saturday. Just a little bit, get outside my comfort zone. Where do you go from here? If you don't have your IDE set up to do interactive debugging, I say that. Learn a new computer language. I know a bunch. Pragmatic Programmer, that book, advocates learning one new computer language a year. But there are other things you can learn too. The Prog has a bunch of great books, like 7 databases in 7 weeks, 7 web frameworks in 7 weeks, languages in 7 weeks. Get the picture. There's lots of great books that they have, and help you, expand your horizons. I have a sandbox on my laptop, and during the lunch break, I went and installed Gatsby because I want to play around with that a little bit. Just make sure you have a place to play around with things. And then pick out a topic you learned about today or tomorrow, and then explain it to a colleague. And if you can't do that, then learn a little bit more about it until you can explain it. The best way to learn is to teach. With that, are there any questions?
Do we have access to these slides?
I will get them out to you. I will tweet out a link to them.
Development team I work with are really small. So like for example, I'm a back-end developer, we work development, and we have another developer that does apps. So it's a bit difficult for us to do a peer review because each of us kind of does something very different.
Sure.
Do you think it's still worth it to do that peer review? Like if I'm peer reviewing the guy doing the apps, even though I don't understand 90% of what he's doing, and vice versa?
That's a really good question. Answered a couple different ways. One is you could find potentially someone else that is a peer of yours, right? Another back-end Drupal developer that could do your peer reviews. It would be outside your company. I don't know if your company would like that or not. The other way to do this potentially is just to have them talk you through it, right? Because some people call it the rubber duck, right? You have a rubber duck and you talk to the rubber duck. My wife has a cat that sits by me all day. So often I talk to my cat. But just the art of explaining it to somebody can also help them, right? So it is tough though if it's technology. It's like, I will do peer reviews on CSS, but there's little chance that I'm going to catch a bug, right? Yeah, it's tough. You have to be a little bit more creative when it comes to that thing.
Given that there's such a strong Drupal community, though, I would think sometimes if you threw something out there to the world that you would get some feedback back, assuming you can share some of that code at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously if you've got an issue, posting it on Drupal is great, but I'm talking just the general process of doing a weekly kind of code review or something.
And the one thing about that too is, so one thing I didn't mention before, but I'll mention it now is, we don't have it set up at Bounteous. I don't want to have it set up this way, where it's always seniors reviewing junior members, right? Because, there are junior developers that will review my code, and now they might not, have the same experience, and so they might not spot things that maybe a more senior person would. But what they do get is exposure to writing good code, and good Drupal best practices and things of that nature. So, depending on how much you want to learn about what the other folks are doing, again, that might be a good way to do it. Again, it's not going to spot the bugs and things, but you can start to pick up patterns. And, if you're thinking, if the app builder's building in React, you won't know the syntax, but, as you kind of walk through it and think about what they're trying to do, I saw the Jira card, and it says, this is what it's supposed to do. You can maybe look at it and say, hey, why'd you do it this way? That type of thing. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, and I will tweet it out next me on Twitter, and make sure it gets up there.
Thank you.
Thanks.